Hi, and welcome to Just War 101. My name is Brother Logan Isaac. If you're just joining us, this is the second part of a four-part series on Just War. In our last video, we talked about Just War Past, where it came from, the historical figures that helped us, bring about the topic of Just War and helped us think about justice in war. And in this video, the second in the series, we're going to be talking about Just War Present and how it's used in the church and the state today. So before we get into the church part of it, Just War is a system that proposes rules within which the undertaking of organized violence might be justified or responsible. And some scholars, Daniel Bell, who wrote Just War as a Christian Discipleship, he has this really helpful way of thinking about it, that whatever it was in the past, it has now become kind of a public policy checklist that politicians and other decision makers just kind of pull in when they've made a decision to go to war, maybe as they're making the decision to go to war, but that you just kind of check the box, and it becomes kind of a rubber stamp instead of a critical assessment tool to help us restrain our own violence and to use what violence we must responsibly and ethically. And so at least now, so for example, President Obama said his favorite theologian was Reinhold Niebuhr. And when he accepted, I believe, his Nobel Peace Prize, he cited Niebuhr and the just war theory in his acceptance speech. And so this is very much something that is leveraged within those political decision-making areas, but whether or not it actually restrains our own violence is yet to be seen. But more importantly, one of the problems or one of the difficulties that just war tradition has faced is how does it keep up with the constantly evolving nature of war. So in our last video, I talked about how Augustine and Aquinas in the 4th and the 11th or 12th centuries, when they were thinking up rationale for war, they never had to think about nuclear war, total war, aerial and underwater bombardment. They didn't have to think about the international diplomacy and democratic systems of government that make a claim to secrecy from its own citizens. There's all these developing arenas within statecraft and the study of political violence that they never could have imagined. The remote drone warfare now is a new area in which scholars and theologians are trying to figure out what makes it just to press a button in Las Vegas and blow up a wedding party just because there's one terrorist sympathizer in the crowd. And so the speed at which our violence has progressed and evolved has made it hard for theologians and philosophers to keep pace. So that being said, I think it's important to look at some of the different denominations, which again didn't exist hundreds and hundreds of years ago, what they have to say about the justice of war. And so I'm going to go through some of these denominations. Feel free to pause and read more in depth if you like. I just wanted to give a quick survey because I didn't want to take for granted that when I say Christian, it doesn't actually mean everybody, because there's probably 1,000 different denominations and micro-denominations that believe their own thing about war. And so I wanted to take the biggest denominational bodies and talk about what it is that they teach their members and what they may or may not enforce in terms of military service and participation in war. So the Southern Baptist Church is one of the largest, if not the largest, Protestant denomination. It has perhaps the most complex set of expectations around war. And I found these from the Southern Baptist Ethics and Religious Liberty Commission. I don't know if that URL is still good. Again, this presentation is from years and years ago that I've kind of revised for at the request of a student, and because I think it's important to discuss. So the Southern Baptist Church believes that in order for war to be just, it must have a just cause, it must have a just intent, it must be a last resort, it must have a legitimate authority, so no revolutionaries, no guerrilla war. They must show restraint, must be proportional, and non-combatant immunity must be protected. Again, if you want to pause it and read more in depth, feel free to do that. And I'm going to continue through these other denominations, including the Roman Catholic Church, I think the second largest denomination after the Southern Baptists. And in the Catechism of the Catholic Church, which is like an instruction manual for all Catholics, in paragraph 2309, section 3, safeguarding peace, under Article 5, for the fifth commandment, thou shalt not kill. So the Roman Catholic Church, in their catechism, which is like an instruction manual or reference guide for all Catholics, in paragraph 2309, section 3, safeguarding peace, under Article 5, the fifth commandment, that thou shalt not kill, there are four requirements of the just war doctrine, and that is that the danger must be grave, lasting, and certain, that any violence entered into must be a last resort, there must be a likelihood of success, you can't do suicide missions, and the use of force must be proportional to the force that was used against its victim. In the Lutheran Church, the Lutheran Confessions, specifically the Augsburg Confession, Article 16, and the Apology, Article 4, Section 191, you'll find that it's almost as complex as the Southern Baptist. The just war must have legitimate authority, international oversight or agreement. There must be some obvious right that's been denied or suffered outrage. It must be a last resort. There must be just intent involved, and the violence must be proportional to the aggressor. The Mennonite Church is one of many Anabaptist denominations. The Anabaptists were a movement that grew out after the Protestant Revolution or the Protestant Reformation, and the Anabaptists thought that the Protestants didn't go far enough back to Scripture. And so the Mennonites, the Quakers, and other Anabaptist groups will be much more in opposition to war and military service based off of their interpretation of Scripture. The Mennonites refuse to support war, and they also are committed to examining their own complicity in systems that make war possible. The United Methodist Church is not an Anabaptist denomination. It's much newer, during the English Reformation. And in their 2004 Book of Discipline, they outline how the force of arms might be regrettably preferable to unchecked aggression, that wars only be entered into under extreme situations, when the need is clear beyond a reasonable doubt, and through appropriate international organizations. The Quakers, another Anabaptist denomination, also known as the Religious Society of Friends, from their Declaration of Faith from the Richmond Conference of Friends in 1887, they go even further than the Mennonites. They oppose the draft. They feel that the military is not consistent with Christ's example. I have some qualms with that, but they support conscientious objectors, tax resistors. They also refuse, some of them, many of them refuse to accept military training or wearing military uniform, accepting military subsidies, and they are committed to creating home and family environments in which love and reconciliation are reflected, and expect the same of institutions, methods, and attitudes external to the Quaker Church. So at the end of the second video, or at this point in the presentation, I ask students, and I encourage you to do the same, to think about how some of these statements and positions, whether they're helpful for regular people. As I said earlier in this video and perhaps the first video, the just war theory as a political consideration seems to be reserved for decision makers. And so as a lower enlisted soldier, when I was in Iraq, it didn't really have anything to say to me. Legitimate authority, sure, protecting non-combatant immunity is one, but what does it mean that the vast majority of people that participate in war are taking orders rather than giving them? Throughout history, like Luther, he has this essay on the Christian serving in war, and he essentially says the prince, the kings and the presidents and the prime ministers, they're the ones that bear this responsibility. The foot soldiers bear no moral guilt for going to war, whether it's just or unjust. because they're just following orders, which was a real convenient argument for the Nazis, but which the Allied powers said, no, that's not enough. And so in this world that we inhabit now, how does just war tradition say anything to the vast majority of people that will experience war from the combatant perspective? If legitimate authority is required, does that undermine our entire nation's, moral legitimacy because we rebelled against King George? We were not a legitimate authority. We just said we were. The Civil War, was slavery such an egregious institution as to, visit, I don't remember, hundreds of thousands, millions of deaths of Americans in order to end it? And did our violence produce justice after that war such that it made it worth it? A lot of people might have qualms with it. World War II, there's growing sentimentality that the use of the nuclear bomb by the United States rendered the entire war unjust because it was not proportional. It did not protect non-combatant immunity. Finally, there's probably it's more popular to see Vietnam and Iraq as unjust wars, but a large number of moderates will see Afghanistan as a just war in response to the destroying of the towers on 9/11. And so if you take some time to think about this, don't just ask, would I be able to fulfill these in war if I were there, but who is it helpful for? What does it do? And how could it be improved so that it's what value it has is extended to as many people as possible? And finally, you can continue to learn more from me at pewpewhq.com, where I have books for sale, word studies that I call Fightin' Words, all kinds of fun resources for finding meaning in faith and service. So if you're a Christian soldier, either that has served or Christian soldier metaphorically, I hope you'll go there and check it out and see if there's anything that might be helpful for you.